strangely, I feel very underqualified, but my only qualification for being here is that I've had the privilege of being around while Joomunjie and Loose Parts emerged, and the Australian Institute of Play have helped so much with that. I've also had the privilege of working with Gabrielle, who comes from Manchester Metropolitan University, and Paolo Singh, who's also with us. Number of research projects over the years, which have been very sustaining and wonderful. I wanted to... Where's the clicker? Get rid of that photo of myself. Yes, good. I wanted to firstly acknowledge the traditional custodians, Yagara and Yugambeh speaking people in Joomunjie land. The Yugambeh language is spoken quite a lot, which is beautiful. So it's really important to us to pay respect and acknowledge the traditional owners. Many of you might have heard of Joomunjie land a bit. It's not really a creation of the school, it's a creation of the children. It's something that they've achieved, and it's been supported by the Institute of Play. I won't dwell too much on how it emerged. I will throw a few pictures that some you've seen before up on the screen as we speak about it. The history was just Loose Parts play back during COVID when that first happened, and some of you have seen these children coming into Loose Parts. That boat, I love this. I still love this picture. That's my boat. Yes, it was. And when my daughter and I first made it into a little sailing boat, it looked like this. But and we went on a big adventure and sailed and went to an island and didn't die. But I like it looking full of mud. And that's how it is now, and it probably will always be that way. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a picture of, remember the water, when we first introduced water and how wonderful that was into Loose Parts. That was what I call the goblet tower. It was well fortified, lasted a few weeks. Really effective piece of defensive architecture. But then we had to launch. You might recognise something here. Who's that chap? Yeah, there you go, mate. You are taller, aren't you, now? You don't have to stand on a car spring anymore. But we needed to launch. We needed to go beyond the pallet fence of that Loose Parts playground. And Joomunjie land emerged over the course of a whole year of really hard work by the students, committees, planning, marketing, all sorts of wonderful things. I'll just show a few pictures so you can get a picture of the scale of the place if you haven't seen it before. It's massive. It can contain at least 100 children quite happily. And it's open after school 3 days a week at the moment. We'd love for that to be more. I agree with you, Jackson. I love this. It's another boat. Notice a water ski there ready? Yeah. And the reintroduction of water after school, when the children make water features, build pools out of tyres and old tarps. And there's lots of chilling out in hammocks that are strung up around trees. I love this one. I just had to put this in because this boy made this over the course of weeks, I think, Iona, wasn't it? Perfecting, and it's probably the first, according to what I'm told, one of the first constructed zip lines that actually worked really, really well. Had to experiment to get that right. And I kind of like that picture. Yeah. So that was speed and danger and wonder. Absolutely wonderful. Lots of hanging out and just socialising, talking. That's Joomunjie land. I'm going to hand over to Gabrielle. We have not devised a new program or any gobsmacking, earth-ending conclusions, but we've had the privilege of slowly watching and attending to what's happening in this playground over many years. And so there are all sorts of definitions of play, but we're just working with a few ideas, and I'll hand over to Gabrielle.
Do I need that?
Oh, you've got that one. Yes.
Hello. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. First off, I'd just like to thank the Australian Institute of Play for inviting me to come all this way and for making that possible. I'd also really like to thank Paolo, who's in the audience, who's been allowing me to work on her research projects now for 5 years. And also just to say what an honour and a privilege it is to share the stage with the most extraordinary leader, Andrew, here. And the reason why I've come all this way is because the children created something quite extraordinary in Joomunjie land. And some quite extraordinary things are happening, which I think are at the edge of our knowledge about play. So yes, we have got some quotes, and I realise it's late in the day. I'm not going to drag you all through them, but I want you to understand a couple of things, really. Play has been deeply devalued within education in favour of bodies that have to sit compliantly still in classrooms, as if that is the most important and only form of valid learning. I think the things that we're uncovering from hanging around with children in Joomunjie land is that actually there are some really extraordinary and rich forms of learning happening there. And not only that, it is actually some of the children who are neurodiverse, who may have very difficult and complex experiences, who are the ones who are attracting our attention, and we'll take you through some of that. But really, I'm going to take a little bit of advice from Tiana, who is an expert presenter, and she's told me that, yeah, you know, it is a bit dry, some of this, and the best thing to do really is just to smile. So instead of going, yeah, but I will just alert you to a couple of these ideas about play, because play is a word that it's very difficult to define. We all think we know what it means, but actually I think it's a really complex area of human experience. And Mark Twain, as you've probably read that already, had a very interesting idea about play. It's what, you know, the body's allowed to do when it's not in a state of having to labour. But we've been on and off very influenced by Donald Winnicott, partly because I think he was quite revolutionary in pointing to the notion that there's a sort of almost magical space between the real world and the fantasy world that we move into often. And he talked about the importance of certain kinds of places and objects for play, and we're going to illustrate a little bit of that throughout the presentation. So yeah, we'll move on a bit to the next one. Yeah, this is quite an interesting one on play that I think is a bit new, and Andrew and I have been reading a paper by Pat Amos. I've moved down, haven't I? Yeah. So this idea that play is a kind of optimal condition that the nervous system likes to be in when it's not overstretched and it's not under stimulated, shall we say. So I think that's a really interesting notion about play. But really in the end, apart from the extraordinary way that people create connections in play and are highly inventive, and you're going to see also hugely creative. There is another idea that we've been playing with, and that is the idea that worlds come into existence through play. I was highly struck by a number of you who've talked about being at least 3 kinds of people. You said, there's me standing here, there's me online, and then there's the me who's comparing myself with the influencers who are perhaps saying, you know, I should be a better kind of beautiful person. So I think young people are already in multiple worlds. And I think what we're going to try and show you is that idea of becoming different and having multiple worlds is something that's happening in Joomunjie land. So I've hinted, oops, sorry, next one. Yeah, it's gone a funny colour there. I've hinted to you that we are particularly impressed and drawn to the children who are, the sort of new term, isn't it, is neurodiverse. I mean, that is a sort of medical term that suggests that the nervous system, including the brain, there is a normal way of functioning and there are atypical ways of functioning. And we are particularly excited by the children who might do such things as hyperfocus, or sometimes people say monofocus, i.e. they seem to get obsessed by one particular concrete action that they repeat and repeat and repeat. And there's a lot of stereotypes out there about this. Most people think that we should shut this down, there's something wrong with these people, we would like to get them to be more typical. But I think we're missing an awful lot. I think we are seeing in Joomunjie land some forms of creativity that are being instigated by neurodivergent young people that are extraordinary. So I think just one last thing maybe to say, and that is some ways of thinking about neurodiversity are that we are all on a spectrum, that, you know, we all have our abilities and things we're not so good at. And I always say to my students when I'm lecturing on this area, we need to look at the ability within the disability. So,
yes, and
I'm passing back to you now, Andrea.
Well, I just sort of, I was going to just do what I usually do and tell stories about what we've seen, but I was struck when I was reading the article by Amos. The understanding of neurodiversity and divergence has been a long journey. Back in the 50s and 60s, children were removed from their families if they were autistic. A lot of people don't realise that. There's a story about someone whose name was Barbara, who was eventually removed from her family. And we're talking about play, we're talking about neurodivergence. She was, before she was removed, she would be found sitting in front of the wardrobe, looking at the roller skates in the cupboard, and just sort of rocking and looking at the roller skates and continually repeating that behaviour of looking at the roller skates, which was considered stereotyped as stimming or a repetitive ritualistic behaviour, you know, a symptom. When she became much older, she became a public speaker, advocate, and she talked about the fact that when she was looking at those roller skates, she was giving them names. They were a family, they were the skate family. She had intricate stories that she'd written in her head about those skates, and she was able to write those down later. She also became a very proficient artist, speaker, and writer, who sold her artwork of the skate family to people. And I guess I just wanted to put that as a provocation out there about the way that we think about children playing alone even, or playing in spaces doing things that we mightn't think manifest or have that sort of affect that we're looking for. We need to stop ourselves from doing that. And if we do that, we start to notice a whole lot of stuff. And this is what's happened to us. I think in what I call J-land sometimes, it's been an experience like that. So, where are we up to now?
I think
First
we're
story?
going to talk about
Yeah.
these.
So, clicker. That's the skates. These are two starboard marker beacons that I bought from the Ballina tip shop. They used to be in the Richmond River, you know, just near South Wall. And in Joomunjie land, we'll call this student Peter. I got the camera because I thought it looked like a rocket, and it was one of those rocketeering things that looked like a good game. But I noticed that Peter, who has very complex background, very complex home life, very things that we can't talk about, wasn't so much in the rocket, but in this enclosed space where she got someone to help her put the cover over it and just spent time in this sort of green, glowing environment. The voices outside would have been muffled, the light would have been this beautiful green light, and she just sat in there. And then at the end when the bell rang, she emerged almost reborn out of that space, and she needed to retreat into that space. This is the kind of play that if you watch and attend to it, you see things and wonder about things. Why is she doing that? Why was this so important for her? It's not just that it's soothing or therapeutic or that it's whatever. There's something about play that is, in a mundane and normal way, very important for children. Not just to be categorised by some sort of psychological theorem or whatever. But I just noticed that, and I know that Gabrielle and Paolo, we were thinking about this, weren't we? About what might be going on.
Yeah. We have been speculating, because that's, as you rightly say, we can only speculate about what was going on. But maybe the navigation beacon evoked something in Peter which she maybe couldn't actually speak about, or maybe wasn't even consciously aware of. But the beacon seems to call her into being. And this is the sense that Winnicott has of a transitional object. It belongs neither to, if you like, the objective or rational or conscious world, nor to just an area of fantasy. We think that there are probably aspects of her lived experience that are, in a sense, being reworked in a bodily way, rather than in a cognitive or through her mind, by the way she moved into and seemed to enjoy the security and quietness of this beacon space. And a little side issue here is really to say something again about Joomunjie land, and that is, this place was designed, wasn't it, by the children themselves.
Yes.
But you guys went around the local builders' sites, yes, and local industries.
Convoy of youths.
Yeah.
Yes.
And collected, yes, the stuff that are the objects in Joomunjie land, aren't, yes, they? And you've seen the pictures, haven't you? I mean, they're tyres, they're crates. We've got a few more, but
all sorts of things.
Yeah, ropes, blah blah blah.
Even political corflute signs. Is the mayor still with us? I did see something made out of a Clive Palmer sign once too.
Sorry. Yeah, but the point about this is that because they are not designed by adults as objects to be played with in a certain kind of way, they are allowing children to use them and take them up in spontaneous ways, in ways that fit the child's world. And it's because they're so kind of open and they can be repurposed, that the way Joomunjie land is designed is actually really important. Yeah,
it is about allowing rather than intervening. And we've heard a lot about that, I suppose, in play circles. But I noticed also that the things like this they're spontaneous, but they're not just impulsive. They're really carefully thought about. And I don't know about thought about, but embodied anyway. It takes a while to get that thing organised. and to get that happening, get it to balance. And so there's a lot there. I thought we might move on to a picture some of you may have seen. This boy we'll call Heath. He's one of our best creative writers in the school. He's an avid reader, and he's set up a little monastery, or a little, anchoritic, hermetic cell. And he sat in there and meditated. And it was beautiful. He had little decorations and he had it set up in a really beautiful way. And other children came along and saw him. Oh, that's the wrong button. And they said, can we join your monastery? And so before long, he had a cult. That's the wrong word. He had a little movement going. And he had other children, but what I found the most intriguing thing about it, he was this peaceful, calm dude sitting there just contemplating. And when the other children approached him, they didn't bound up and say, hey, can I join your restaurant, like they might over there. They said, do you mind if we join in with you? Can we set up something here? And it was almost like a sacred space. And it was beautiful to watch that spread. And again, this is not something that I was expecting. This is not what I imagined when I thought, let's do play. It'll help with playground behaviour problems. This is far beyond anything like that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that what we're beginning to think we're seeing is that it was the respect with which, the quietness with which the other children entered into his space. So they kind of adopted the atmosphere that he was emanating from the way he was sitting quietly in that enclosure. And again, this is something that we don't think many people are speaking much about, but the children are feeling their way into a space that is not just, rough and tumble play or something like that, but it's almost like the monastery is a kind of scene, a setting, and that they are intrigued by it. They're pulled into the space because they are in some way a little bit awestruck by what's going on. And we'd probably say that he was one of the neurodiverse children.
Yes.
Yeah. And maybe we can go on and illustrate that further with Michael.
Sorry, Michael.
Should we go on with the next one and carry on this theme a bit more? Yes, I will
press that button. This one is another of my favourite ones. This is Michael's car. It's a full-sized car. It changed and morphed. It had a different front, had a different back. I mean, he carefully constructed this. And this is a boy that spoke very little except for slightly echolalic segments of speech that he put together. He became quite fluent later in his life with communication, but he did his attention to detail, like that wheel was out of whack, so he put a rock inside it to keep it lined up. So he did a wheel alignment. He had a lot of admiration. There's other children who were just going, wow, I wish I had that car. That's the best thing I've ever seen. And other children wanted to get into it. But I had an underlying fear. The fear was that if someone touched it or changed it or took it over, I knew what could happen emotionally for Michael. That was a real worry for me. It was a worry for us all. We're going, okay, this is beautiful, but what is going to happen? Because someone is going to mess this up at some point. The punchline. Oh, sorry, I'll get the hang of this. So the car's changed a bit. It's had an accident, I think. But that's him. And he came to me one day and he said, I'm done with the car. And I said, what? He said, no, I sold it. He said, I got 50 pine cones. And he said, I got 50 pine cones for it. And I was still amazed. I said, so you're okay with that? And it was like he was saying, you stupid, I got 50 pine cones. 50, and pine cones are hard to come by at certain times of year. And So this was a classic example of him as a child who's very much neurodivergent, doing something amazing which drew in, and he was so proud, and he won so many friends. He's gone on to do, I don't mean to be triumphal, but he's gone on to make amazing things, both digital and physical sculptures and productions. And these are the sort of things that occur. And I don't even know where to begin with that one. That one just amazed me. It really struck me. Yeah.
Yeah, it struck us all, really. So what I think we want to suggest to you is that small kind of local economies almost are set up. So the pine cones really was a currency, wasn't it? And it spread right across, so that, you know, that was not just confined to this example, but and what we watched was other kinds of practices being developed. They were emergent and then they were shared. So I've talked about atmosphere and how the other young people were drawn specifically to an atmosphere. People were respectful of this car. They didn't trash it. You were worried, we were worried that it would be touched. But I think we've noticed a lot how other children begin to understand that neurodiverse young people have got something quite extraordinary and can do things that they actually deeply respect. And we're beginning to think that it's something about the ability for sustained concentration over long periods of time. So to build that car and keep it sort of going and running and using it over a long, long period of time, it is quite an extraordinary thing. And we've noticed this many, many times. And we're beginning to think that these young people are kind of practicing ways of making connections and building what I might call atmospheres and mini cultures in ways that build on the ability within the neurodiversity. And these things are, as I say, the sustained intensity of the concentration, the seriousness with which they build or sit or construct. And that, I mean, we can talk about young people not having good attention spans because of, you know, social media or whatever. But these young people have phenomenal abilities to attend and to stick with activity and slightly vary it. So there's a sort of variation that builds incrementally complexity into their creations, but they're not just material creations, they're almost, I'm using the word culture because we're struggling to properly define what we really mean by this, but they're building little societies, which is the word worlding that we were hinting at before.
And the cultural society thing is what I was interested in, because we might think about that simplistically and say, Norm, this child might understand its talk, need help with emotional regulation when something bad happens. So that's true. We do help children with self-regulation or co-regulation. But this is a case where a child who's neurodivergent, a social community structure is what helped him learn how to let go of this car. And that's amazing. That's not just a one-way street. It's not transactional. It's a community. It is a little culture in which he learns how to excel and even let down his guard and let go of something. And there's something, and also I just want to say before I forget, let's just strike from the record any idea that children who are neurodivergent don't have imaginative play. Because, the absolute scintillating, scintillating, beautiful imaginative play and imaginative aesthetic and construction and art that we see produced is what's the lure. There's a philosopher called Whitehead who talks about lure. And this is luring people together and onwards. So, yeah, it's the end of my little...
Yeah, no, I think we'll go to our next Danielle.
Yeah. This is a story I don't have a picture for. I think I just took a picture of some plastic pipes. There was a little boy. Yes, we're trying to not use the right names, so we've done that. But there's a little guy who came to us. I've known him since he was 4, and he was said to be non-verbal. Not moving around much either, and not doing well. A lot of health issues were solved. Didn't speak much though. One day, we did discover that the non-verbal thing was not true. So one day, for example, I was bending down to see what he was making in the dirt. He was making this square thing, and he was putting little things, sticks in it and things. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he whispered to me, "I'm building a foundation for my fabulous house." Now that's not really non-verbal, right? And I said, "Okay." So from then on, we'd get down and we'd listen more. And he continued to do things like that. Amazing visual artist, drawings, internal organs of animals, map of the London Underground. Yep. Amazing things. But one day down in Joomunjie, under the trees, I just saw him running around, scurrying in a sort of frenzied way, grabbing pieces of this sort of pipe, which were lying around, and lining them up. Like stereotypically, we might think, okay, that's a neurodivergent thing to do, to get a whole lot of similar items and line them up. And we just sort of rate it that way. Then he started to splay them around in a sort of a fan shape. And I noticed that he had them ordered from small to large. And then he had a stick, and he sat down and he started to play music on it. And then he started to sing. And I couldn't understand what he was singing, so I got close and I said, "What?" So I asked his father, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's a West Papuan language." So now we've got 2 languages. And he also spoke Pidgin English. And I guess other children were gathering around just in a crowd going, "Wow, this is amazing." So that's the sort of surprise that comes along. And I could choose hundreds of those stories. And I suppose one thing I just wanted to mention is one of the privileges of having Joomunjie in a school. And we've talked about where do we put these playgrounds in our community? But having them in a school, we serve a community where there is a lot of people with complex needs. And a playground like this in a school is such a privilege. And so we're very thankful that we've been able to continue for 3 years now. So, yeah.
Yeah, Andrew, you were telling me that it's about 40% of your students who are neurodivergent or have complex needs.
40, yeah, according to the new way of looking at things, about 45%.
Yeah. I mean, that's extraordinarily high. And you can see that what's going on in Joomunjie land is highly generative, a huge amount of expression, lots of connections being made. And I think it would be fair to say that over time, we've watched the complexities and the difficulties that these young people have been challenged with changing, slightly morphing, making it more possible for them to be able to enter into classrooms and to take part in learning in the more conventional ways. So it's not something that is just, if you like, restricted to the play area. There are actual effects on the children that are affecting their ability to be in school more generally.
Yes. And we're talking about neurodiversity, and there are children with trauma and with all sorts of other experiences that manifest very in similar ways. But we see a great benefit to their schooling, I suppose you'd call it, and their trajectory through schooling and into high school. So absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I want to stress, and I'd like to particularly thank the Institute of Play and Hiano for doing this, is for really forcing the notion that the adults stand back,
Yeah.
watch and respect. And it's only by standing back and being quiet and really listening and watching for long periods of time that we're being able to uncover these extraordinary events going on in the play area.
And it's not reconnaissance, it's not monitoring, it's not checking or being on patrol. It's just careful attending to what's going on. There's a philosopher called Simone Weil, and she talked about this sort of almost loving attention that we give to the world. And I think in playgrounds, there's a culture of that too, because there's, the great thing about being on what we used to call on duty in schools, you know, it sounds almost military. In these spaces, you just sit on a milk crate and have a warm cup of coffee, and the world just sort of flows. And that's where we start to see this wonder. Will we click on the next one, Gabrielle?
Yeah, I think we're moving to our final
Yes.
sections, aren't we? So we wanted to really just try and summarise for you some of the things that we think we're seeing. So we suggest to you that the neurodiverse children have a particular capacity for sustained, intense and creative activity over long periods of time. And it seems to be facilitated by both the kinds of objects that are in the loose parts play area and the way it's owned by the children, designed by the children, and the way the adults stand back. They watch, they're attentive, but they absolutely do not interfere. I think that these play spaces, it's very important that children are obviously safe, but you can see there's, if you like, risk-taking behaviour in the conventional ways going on. But we have never seen a child, for example, I think you said to me that the children even the children who don't wear shoes, do not step
Yes,
on
some
nails,
children
for
who
example.
are neurodivergent don't want to wear shoes, and so we allow that. And what's interesting about that is that those children know where to put their feet and where not to put their feet. So, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they learn to navigate this space. And the play scenarios that are initiated by the neurodiverse children in particular are intriguing and attract great interest from the other children. So we're starting to think about children's emergent cultures in the play spaces involving, for example, fascination, respect, sustained activity, amazing creative and aesthetically beautiful formations. And we're noticing the way children make patterns and set up distinct rhythms. And these seem to help to transform challenging behaviours into generative kinds of expression that seem to these young people to have a certain urgency about them.
Yeah.
We feel that there is an expression going on, a need, if you like, to communicate in their language and in their ways that is it's important, it's urgent. Yeah. So learning is taking place. It may be that actually it's even more important learning than adult-initiated tasks. We still have an awful lot more to understand, but we've got a sort of summing up little...
I think we've just got a summary of our suggestions there.
Yeah.
I probably won't read through them, but, or will we? Yeah.
We'll have a go.
Might as well.
So, if I could find it, I'll have to do it like this, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've noticed, as I say, that, okay, thanks a lot, that some children in particular, and we do think it is the neurodiverse and perhaps those children who have complex lives, need to express and they have specific abilities which often are seen as disabilities, like monofocus or hyperfocus or repetitive concrete actions, that actually are, we think, the building blocks for these more embodied and sensory ways of constructing and creating. And they are able to sustain these creations over really long periods of time. We can't fully describe how these minor cultures, such as the sleeping chamber, the car, the monastery, or the music making is happening. But we suspect that the children are kind of activating forms of vitality that they are familiar with due to their life experiences, as well as high levels of experimentation going on. They seem to play through making patterns, changing arrangements in what are almost imperceptible ways, unless, as I say, you really pay close attention to this. But they're forging new connections at great speed, we think. And these pattern making gets carried forward as a sort of form of vitality that is reinvested in new configurations of objects. Constructions materialize into identifiable creations. And we think that in these creations, there's both a haunting of the past and, as I say, sort of experimentation with what's around them. These innovations become noticeable to other children who seem to sense a kind of aura or an atmosphere that they find highly attractive. And there's a sort of affective charge that is almost viscerally felt by the other children, perhaps below the level of conscious awareness. So we suggest there's a sort of kind of contagion that lures children in the vicinity into making and wanting to be part of these mini-cultures set up and initiated and sustained by neurodiverse children. So we think these minor cultures have specific forms of sociality that can be imagined as possibly multiple worldings and multiple ways of becoming.
Thanks, Gabrielle. So we've been thinking about play, we've been thinking about neurodivergence and diversity, and I'd also like to challenge educators to think about education beyond the almost ubiquitous trend for it to just care about things that can be measured or marked. This is well beyond anything that can be measured or marked. This is what education and coming into the world is about. And it's been a privilege to be a part of it. Thank you, Gabrielle. Yeah, thank you.